So, Bismillah, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We are thrilled to have you all, no matter where you are from. I can see from the chat we have some visitors and some attendees from Poland. Welcome, welcome. My name is Zahra. I'll be guiding our session for today. Really appreciate you giving your time to be here today. We're here to listen, we're here to reflect, and we're here to learn, really. And it's my great honor to welcome tonight's guest, Suhaiymah Manzoor-Khan. Suhaiymah is a British poet, writer, educator, and public thinker whose work challenges and disrupts common narratives about history, race, identity, violence, and what it means to belong in a contemporary Britain. Her debut poetry collection, Post-Colonial Banters 2019, explores race, history, and the question of Britishness. Her 2022 book, Tangled in Terror, Uprooting Islamophobia, is an incisive and deeply researched examination of how Islamophobia shapes our institutions, policies, borders, media, and our everyday life. And so her most recent publication, Seeing for Ourselves and Even Stranger Possibilities, which is published in 2023, uses memoir, essays, poetry, reflection to question representational politics, identity, and belonging. Suhaiymah is also a spoken word poet. His performances, including her viral piece, This Is Not a Humanizing Poem, brought her to public attention as someone reimagining what it means to speak truth as a Muslim woman in Britain. Beyond writing, she works as a public educator and facilitator of creative workshops, like this one today, and is involved in activism and solidarity work addressing prisons, marginalization, and structural injustice. And a note from myself, I am a great fan of her literary work, but particularly her play that became a screenwriting play, Peanut Butter and Blueberries. So if you haven't seen it and it comes in theatres again, do make sure that you watch it. It is absolutely amazing. So Suhaiymah, thank you so much for joining us.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having me.
So to begin, there's a couple of questions. So this session, inshallah, will be a little bit more interactive than our previous sessions for those of you who have attended our previous sessions, inshallah. So I'm going to ask Suhaiymah a couple of questions, inshallah, just about her book and about her writing. And then, inshallah, the floor is going to be open throughout for any questions that come in. So you can use the function, the Q&A function that's on the actual Zoom that we have here on the screen. And I'll happily ask questions on your behalf to Suhaiymah. You can also ask to be unmuted. We're more than happy for anybody who wants to ask her questions directly. Please do note, however, that this webinar will be recorded, and so your voice will also be recorded during the call. So if you're unhappy with that, please submit your questions that way or via the chat as well. So that chat option is also there, and we'll have Suhaiymah answer them. This is an hour she has dedicated to us. So to begin, there's a couple of questions so we get to know you a little bit better for those of us who don't know you that well. What inspired you to start writing?
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa sallam. I always struggle with this question because I don't know that there's like something that inspired me to start writing. I think probably like most boring origin stories. I just have always been a reader since I was a child, and I think if you read, often words become the form through which you express yourself. So I think writing is just something that I've always had to do to process my thoughts and feelings. I'm that kind of person who has to journal every morning to kind of know what I'm feeling. So yeah, I think for a long time I just wrote for myself, and then I think maybe the question of why or what sort of made me want to share that writing is more to do with context that I lived in. And I think particularly when I was studying at university, it was the first time, I suppose, in my life where I experienced I was aware of structural dynamics of power and racism, and I think became very palpably aware of the fact that I was being viewed primarily as a Muslim woman and not as all these other things that I thought I was really, which was like, someone who likes riding a bike and someone who likes to read books. So that then becoming my primary identity, I think there was a lot I wanted to, the interior reality of myself that I wanted to externalize, and I wanted people to be able to see. And a lot of that I think was a very personal quest to be seen and to be acknowledged and to be heard. But actually then as context developed and changed, I realized that actually when I'm speaking as a Muslim woman, there's something actually in that itself that people are hearing, and I'm speaking to a context in which Muslims are racialized, in which Muslim women are in particularly, seen in a certain light. And so, yeah, the desire to keep sharing, or the need to feel like I should share, came from the context I was in rather than something internal that, inspired me. Um, if anything, it kind of, to be honest, felt like a responsibility and an obligation at some points, and at other points felt like something really important to do because the narratives about Muslims became, increasingly. I'm talking about 15 years ago now, so increasingly just, wild, and um, I was always keen to dissect those narratives. So I think, yeah, quite a boring and maybe a bit academic reason, but those were the things that have kept me writing.
I think we can all probably relate to many parts of that. We just probably used it in a different way.
Okay.
So you obviously did it through writing. A lot of people that I know may have done it through activism.
Mm.
Some people, went into their career trajectories changed as a consequence of it. So we all had some reason as to why we ended up where we are right now. And as a child, did you have a particular favorite book? And if so, if it was a particular favorite, why was it so meaningful? Why was it your favorite book?
I think
And you can't
difficult.
say Roald Dahl.
I don't know. Yeah, I think I don't make me think about Roald Dahl. Yeah, I think I just used to read. I remember I'd go to the library with like a box. That was my thing, and I was really inspired by the film Matilda. And I guess I maybe wanted, saw myself in that kind of reader. I think as a kid, I just read anything and everything. Like I don't know what books exist today for kids, but like I don't know, Goosebumps and Tracy Beaker and that kind of thing. But I remember really liking the book Heidi, which is really random. And then I think by my teens, I was introduced to the autobiography of Malcolm X, and as with every single person who ever reads the autobiography of Malcolm X, that kind of changed my life. And literally, I was like, I must start praying. Like this is like it kind of changed my whole want for what I thought a Muslim should and could be. So obviously, again, nothing unusual or unique about my origin story. It turns out, but yeah, I think I really honestly just read really broadly, and it was only, I suppose, as I came into adulthood that I started to read more specifically around, racism and power, and particularly, I guess, initially actually influenced more so by like African American women a lot of times, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, that kind of thing, and even I think the entry point to my politicization, interestingly, because it's very different now, was a kind of feminist lens that then was like, oh, this is really like uncomfortable. Why is it uncomfortable? Reading intersectionalist kind of feminism, changing that view, and then I think the journey, then unpacking power and racism more broadly, kind of taking me fully almost away from that entirely. So yeah, a whole journey, I think, inspired by other people's writing.
So Malcolm X's book is often described as the training manual for anyone who wants to go into either spoken word or anything leadership like context.
Mhm.
Did you find that was the case for yourself for Malcolm X's work?
Yeah, well,
Is this his speeches and writings, right?
maybe. I think what
Yeah.
particularly resonated with me was probably, yeah, something about mobilizing people through oration. I think you're right. I think there is something about seeing how many people compelled by just the words of a person, and I think that is something I have found amazing. And I honestly think is a miraculous nature of words. Allah knew and gave the human being language in a way that animals don't have, in a way that non-sentient beings don't have. And I think that words, the Quran is in words. The Arabic language is this kind of really complex and beautiful, miraculous language in which revelation comes. So I'm I'm really convinced that words have this power that other things don't. And I guess I'm biased, but I've seen it. I've seen hearts moved, and I think, like you're saying, I think the thing that probably for me was most inspiring about Malcolm X was that a person can almost like bind people through their words, mobilize them, move them in a way that I hadn't seen books do that necessarily, like a kind of passive book necessarily do that. I mean, obviously, I did experience that, but yeah, I think it's something about the power to mobilize on a large scale, and I guess that's also within the history of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ as well, right? Words and language and oration to move and change society at large.
Absolutely. And that was actually the link that I was going to make, is that about literary work and how Islam started as something that was essentially an oral tradition. It was never written. The Quran wasn't written, codified, like in the time of Rasulullah. It was very much like something that was spoken. And I think. Do you think by this journey of writing that which one would you prefer? Would you prefer more literary work or do you prefer like the spoken word?
I don't know about preference, but I am moved more 100% by verbal oration. I was laughing about this with my family the other day. Like, I'll sign up to do something based on a compelling speaker. Like, I will just and it so it kind of goes both ways. Like, I think because I feel
Susceptible
I
to marketing.
I think when I want to be, absolutely. Yeah, but I think also because what we believe as well is that it's the words come from the heart, right? And so I think there's a saying, and I don't know who it's attributed to, but like the soul of a man lies under the tongue, and I think that when you hear words spoken from a heart that is illuminated with the light of God and with knowledge of God and knowledge in Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and all those things, I think you really, really do. And I would say this is why I really think there is something magical because it is only experiential. Like I think you can say this to somebody, but until somebody experiences it themselves, and I think everyone has experienced that at some point in your
To
life.
some level, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think also authenticity comes in a lot when, like, the reason why certain public speakers you would listen to more than others, for
yeah,
example, or why they're compelling is not only are they charismatic and good speakers and all of the above, but sometimes it's just they genuinely believe what they're saying and they're passing
so
on.
true.
And
Yeah,
authenticity is 100% a part of the topic here. So, moving on to your book, Tangled in Terror, Uprooting Islamophobia. It's a powerful and timely work. What motivated you to write it, and how did the project come about? So maybe start with how did the project come about, and then what motivated you to write it?
sure. I mean, I had no intention of writing a book about Islamophobia. That is like definitely not something that I wanted to do necessarily. It's definitely not something I wanted to do.
Absolutely understand that.
But the opportunity came about because Pluto Press, who are the publisher, they had this series in mind, which was going to be essentially accessible um, takes on different topics. So there's a whole series called Outspoken, and there's a number of books in there. And what they wanted was for it to not be academic to the extent that it's written by someone who exclusively has a PhD in this topic, but also to be by somebody who is able to kind of maybe use some of that language, but also has experience in the kind of activist circles, whether that is campaigning or whether that is kind of, narrative disruption or whatever kind of, whatever you want to call activism or what is encompassed by that. So I was approached actually to write the book. And initially it was like, should it be about racism? Should it be about Islamophobia? But my feeling in the end was that although I definitely think Islamophobia is a form of racism, I think it deserved its own space. And when I looked at kind of what's on the market, there wasn't really anything I felt at that time, and I think inshallah it's different now, but there wasn't really anything that was an accessible reader that I, for example, would give to a younger sibling to know about Islamophobia. And I also felt that what did exist oftentimes was more of a rebuttal to an unspoken question. And so you have a lot of books, I feel, that are about disproving stereotypes about Muslims, and just proving the humanity of Muslims again and again. So we do integrate, we are not sexist, blah, blah, blah. And that to me didn't actually address what Islamophobia is, doesn't actually deal with the root cause of Islamophobia. And I didn't feel like it was a good enough analysis. But on the other hand, the analyses that I felt were quite good were like really academic and inaccessible. And like, you kind of feel like you need to run this through ChatGPT 7 times to understand what's being said. So the reason I wrote the book was that I felt there was a need, and I realized that I don't have all the knowledge myself for sure, and so it would actually be a really cool way to engage with different people, different writers, and so I did a bunch of interviews. I also read different texts, and so yeah, that is sort of how it came about. And I guess one of the other motivations I'll just mention was that I do a lot of creative workshops with young people, and one of the things that I find really heartbreaking is when I work with young Muslims. Um, 11 years old, year 7, 12 years old, that kind of age range. What I found again and again is if you ask Muslim kids, and this goes for any racialized group actually of children, to write about themselves, they ended up always writing what I call I am not poem. So I am not a terrorist. I am not da da da. And I just was so gobsmacked and dismayed that at 11 years old, you already feel the need to apologize and explain for who you are. And you're already aware actually of this like criminalizing, securitizing gaze upon you. So the other reason that I wanted to write the book, and I guess the more like personal motivation, was that I don't want children to live like that. I want children to be empowered and equipped to understand that actually the onus is not on me. There's a root reason that Islamophobia exists. It's actually political, material, and historical, and it actually isn't because I haven't proven, or Muslims haven't proven, that we are nice and good and charitable and we can smile and all those things, because that's been done and done and done. And yet Islamophobia not only persists, but seems to be worse and worse by the day. And so that was the kind of the kernel that I wanted to unpack.
Awesome. But yeah, absolutely agree. And I think a lot of us can relate to a lot of that, because if you have younger siblings who are in a particular, or even for those of us who have children, if you have children and you want to direct them to any particularly literary work, really what is there that's not academic or political? Like maybe not all children, not all kids, not all people are vested in order to look at things in that particular way. So, how do you hope? So, another question that we have, actually, let's take a question from the Q&A section, because it might actually be, it's a lot better than my personalized ones. So Asma Ali asks, Salam, what are your thoughts about the current conversation around the word Islamophobia? Since writing your book, which I recently bought and looking forward to reading, so good one, Asma. Would you like to use the word anti-Islam instead? Is that a better term?
Yeah, so this is something, so maybe it's worth me actually saying something about the book. I really haven't done that. So, the book itself presents an argument that essentially deals with what you're saying, Asma, and it's what I decide is that I'm not actually interested so much in arguing over or joining in the debate about the word itself and what Islamophobia means. And the reason I say that is not to be flippant, but because I actually was more interested in, I feel like that sometimes deflects our focus from what it is that Islamophobia does. Like, what are we actually talking about? Rather than trying to get into definitions, let's just look in reality, in practice, what's happening. And so my focus ends up being on, whether you want to call it anti-Islam, anti-Muslim hatred, anti-Muslim racism, Islamophobia. These are all just manifestations of what I would like to see as a historical process of racism that distinguishes Muslims as a group who then face criminalization and bias, securitization, surveillance on the back of that. And so the process that I look at, and I try to place Islamophobia within, is a process of European Western colonialism. And I go that far back because actually it is through the process of colonialism that the European Enlightenment theorists, who are, so celebrated today for coming up with human rights and liberal ideas, etc., it is there actually that they begin to produce the idea of racial hierarchy. And you can read this in the writings of, those who are celebrated today, like Voltaire and Rousseau and Kant. Actually, if you read their writings, they're talking about things like the only inventors in the world are the white, and then they create these subcategories: yellow, red, black. They're literally making it up. And the question I had is why? Why do they make up these categories of race, not only in a horizontal, categorization, like here's some knives, here's some forks, here's some spoons, but instead in a hierarchy? And the reason is very clear. It was material. There was a clear material benefit because you are committing genocide in nations. You are stealing people from, West Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and you're taking them across to islands that you so-called have just found, and you are completely, degrading the land, uprooting the environment of these places, creating a whole ecosystem that is only to essentially feed the appetite that you have for capital. So you're, growing cotton grown by slaves, and this is really, really, really lucrative. But how do you do it? You need to justify it through racism. And so I go all the way there to say that Muslims and the view of who Muslims are as a group has been formed through racism, right? So then when those same countries and those same states and those same kind of narratives interact with quote unquote Muslim lands, and bear in mind Sub-Saharan Africa had a lot of Muslims and a lot of the enslaved people were Muslim, but when you kind of in their mind meet lands that are Muslim and also not black, because there's a new racialization here in their minds, you then see this Oriental kind of language that appears, and Edward Said obviously famously writes about this. And so the argument I make, again, is that all of this is not just accidental. And I mean, it's not a new argument. That's what Edward Said himself is saying, is that it's ideologically beneficial to the West to say that the Orient and the Muslim lands are other and different and backwards, because it allows you to intervene. It allows you to take over the treasury of these lands. It allows you to deindustrialize these lands. It allows you to say that we are the only civilized people and only we can show you how to become civilized. And then you track that through the 19th century, the 20th century, up until now, what you notice is 2001 after 9/11, actually, it's not that the world changes. It's just that those very same narratives are now weaponized and placed in the fore of the public imagination to say that, look, there is a violent threat from a group of people who occupied these lands, but also some of them are in our lands, and we need to deal with it. How are we going to deal with it? Well, we don't know which of the Muslims are violent, but it's an essence that's inside them. This is what racism says, that there's an essential trait within them. You can call it culture, you can call it ideology, you can call it religion, but all of those things, as Stuart Hall really well argues, just re-articulate race. Because in reality, we're still saying it's this thing that is innate in these people, whether it's in their heads or their hearts or their whatever you want to call it. And so what all of that means is that whether you think that all Muslims are terrorists or you think that it's only a minority with a warped view of Islam, every single Muslim does need to be surveilled and every single Muslim does need to be treated with suspicion for us to have a safe society. And so now you create this eternal threat. You can have an eternal war on terror, which is lucrative financially. It's a cliche now to say it, but the oil fields of Iraq in 1990 were not owned by Chevron, were not owned by ExxonMobil, were not owned by the gas and oil companies of the West, which they now are. It's, the same with drone companies and arms trades. We've seen it with the genocide in Palestine. Like, we know this very well now. And, alhamdulillah, there've been people who've really pointed that out to us, that arms manufacturers make mass amounts. The government itself enters contracts making mass amounts of money financially benefiting from this idea that there is an eternal terrorist threat, who then we as Muslims face the brunt of as we're just kind of collateral. That's one of the arguments I make about Islamophobia, is actually it's very little to do with Muslims. It's all to do with finance and ideology. And the ideological argument is more so about the fact that if you say Muslims are the cause and the source of all violence, then what you do is you deflect and you absolve yourself. So, for example, when 7/7 happens, it's well known that, the government engaged with a lot of Muslims across the UK, and Muslims overwhelmingly said in these focus groups that, we think one of the grievances that has been felt by the Muslim community at large is the foreign policy of the UK. We're not happy with the invasion of Iraq. We're not happy with the other kind of imperialist projects going on. But what does the government do? Well, they don't want to stop and change their foreign policy. That's ludicrous. So instead, let's say, no, 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 no. It's to do with integration. It's to do with parallel lives that Muslims are living in this country, and we need to start integrating Muslims more. Let's have British values. Let's introduce prevent. Let's start surveilling within and changing the cultural mode of the Muslim. And so what that does ideologically is it allows Britain to absolve itself from any, and Western states at large, because they all have these similar policies, to absolve themselves from having any role in causing violence, when instead they are the beginning force of violence. When people respond violently, individuals, to state violence never gets seen. And so my two arguments are this, that the Islamophobia, whether you want to call it that, anti-Muslim racism, hatred, whatever, I don't care about the word, and sorry to be flippant if that does feel flippant, but I'm more interested in the fact that this view of Muslims, this historical and deeply violent view of Muslims, is one that is lucrative and ideologically beneficial, and therefore it is irrelevant if we disprove stereotypes. It is irrelevant if we, do these happy videos about Muslims showing that they smile. It doesn't matter that we prove things about Muslims, because actually none of that addresses the root, because the root is financial and the root is ideological. And so my question and my kind of invitation is, if you keep trying to rebut something by focusing on, the thing above the surface, you're not actually dealing with the roots. You're not taking it out of the ground. You're not uprooting it. And so that's why it's called Tangled Terror, Uprooting Islamophobia. So to answer your question, Asma, I don't mind. I think that, as much as I care about words for the reason that they can help us see and not see things, I think when it comes to Islamophobia, actually the conversation about words sometimes obfuscates and hides the actual reality. And that's maybe just what personally, as someone who kind of engages with people in this level, not on an academic level, I'm interested in. So I hope that helps, Asma.
Awesome. So I wanted to just pinpoint something that you said, which was interesting about your liking the issue of Islamophobia to racial tensions and how the Black community was treated, like, for example, in America, and how it is treated, like how they otherized and sectionalized and put a stereotype there of how Black people are, as opposed to like nowadays what's happening with Muslims, essentially. A little bit more thoughts, like, is there any other parallels that you've seen, like, in your study?
Yeah,
That would be quite interesting, I think, for our crowd to know.
Sure. Yeah, actually, my point is not to liken them. That's actually not the point. The point is they are the one and the same thing. And I think one of the problems is that we start to create these like discrete notions of, how Muslims are treated is similar to how Black people are treated. That's completely false, because Black Muslims face both those things at the same time. And so what that proves to us is that within white supremacy and that racial hierarchy, the point that I'm trying to make is actually, for example, you look at the first enslaved communities in America, one of the earliest slave revolts that happened was from Muslims from sub-Saharan Africa who were enslaved, and the imam, the actual sheikh of a lot of these Muslims, was imprisoned. And so this leads to a revolt of the enslaved Muslim people. And the colonizers and the enslavers, they don't quite understand this spiritual dynamic, right? They don't understand that this is the imam, this is the sheikh, and these are the murids or whatever it is. And so what I think is really important to see there is that the scariness of the slave revolt is both due to its Muslimness and its blackness and the Africanness and the slaveness. And so all of these things are not completely discrete. And I just think that's important to say, because my point isn't that the communities are experiencing similar things, but instead to say that these things all build on top of one another. So then when the Muslims, and actually another good example is at that same time, so it's the Spanish who actually one of the first to go to the Americas, right? And the Spanish have experience with the Muslims where in Spain, because Muslims, it was a Muslim empire that, that large part of the Iberian Peninsula that is now, Granada and all of
Andalusia.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Andalusia was a Muslim, part of the Muslim empire. And so their experience of Muslims, they actually projected onto the Americas. When they got to the Americas, they said, we're familiar with people of a different religion. And what they did after they reconquested, as they say, Spain, they said that Muslims and Jews needed to convert to Christianity. And if they didn't convert, they were suspicious that their Muslimness or their Jewishness remained in their blood. And what you see here is a kind of crypto-ethnic identity being created. That religion is something in your blood, right? This is a new idea. When they get to the Americas, they come across these indigenous people and they don't understand. They don't know. They're saying like, what are these people? Are they are they salvageable in the same way that the Muslims and Jews can be converted but still be suspicious, or are they actually completely soulless and therefore unlike us altogether? In which case we're okay to kill them, we're okay to take their lands and take their things. And so I guess the subtlety that I'm trying to draw out here is that it's not that these are discrete and similar likenable things, but instead that the whole history of racial hierarchy, the view that the way that Muslims are viewed today comes out of that. And I am always a little bit resistant about words like stereotypes, as much as they're real and they exist. It's less so that these are, I think what's useful to understand is that stereotypes are an application of, I think, so Stuart Hall says it really well, and I'll just go into that for a minute. So what he says is that, and so he's a really famous political theorist from the UK and cultural theorist, and what he says is that racism is when a social or political phenomena is explained by a racial behavior. So, for example, we say stealing or gang violence, knife crime is caused by blackness. Okay, black young men, therefore we just need to arrest them and stop and search them and etc. Okay, so instead of saying, actually, what's the cause of this socially? Like, what political factors are causing this? I've been working for the last few years with Muslims in prison. So 18% of the prison population in this country is Muslim. Instead of saying, what social factors might be causing that, what kind of disenfranchisement, what kind of crimes are disproportionately assumed to be Muslim crimes, what kind of surveillance and policing do Muslim communities face, why might it be the case that, certain areas of the country have less fund, except, there's so many things you could explore. But instead of doing that, we just say, of course, because there's a racial character of, propensity for violence amongst Muslims, that, a lot of them are paedophiles and, part of these grooming gangs. And there's all of these stereotypes, as you say. But I think when we just kind of keep it at that superficial level, we need to realize that actually those stereotypes are processes of attributing social and political phenomenon to being caused by individual people, not only people, but their interior way of being. And when we talk about racialization, what we're saying is that these people, for example, when Jean-Paul Menezes, I always get his name wrong, the
Yeah.
Brazilian man who was
Yeah.
shot by police after 7/7, he was racialized as a Muslim, right? What I mean by that is that they said, oh, look, they actually said he's got Oriental eyes. That's one of the reasons that they shot him, the London Met Police. That is a process of saying that we attribute these external factors of your hijab, your beard, your eyes in that case, which is random, you eating halal food, whatever it is, to an internal reality, which is violent, this, that. And so although they use language like religion and culture and ideology, the point I'm trying to make is the racism that Muslims face is built on the very same racism that that people have always been facing, no matter what group they've been said to be part of. So whether it is black, whether it is yellow, whether it is oriental, whether it is, because the Muslims were Mohammedans at one point, they were, orientals at one point, they were slaves at one point. Even today, if you go around the world, blackness will be not be called blackness in different places, and Muslimness will be seen in different ways in different places. So yeah, I think the point that I'm trying to make is that this is all one continuum. And actually, the point I'll end on here is that therefore we cannot surgically sort of remove and end Islamophobia without ending its accompanying entire white supremacy system. And that is deeply rooted in colonialism. So we need to end colonialism. So this requires like an entire, the world that's been built over the last 500 years has to be toppled in its entirety. And Islamophobia is not just this kind of silo thing.
There's a establishment of a new ecosystem, essentially, because the current ecosystem that we have is killing off a certain part of of the greater world. So awesome, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I have another question, bit more political. I don't know why they come to you for these questions, but there we go. Brother Jahangir Akbar has asked, in terms of the government taking their time and possibly not defining or recognizing Islamophobia, are we being legally otherized?
Read that
So,
again.
as in, for example, I think what he's trying to ask is, for example, the Sikh community I mean, the Equality Act did bring in a lot of, as in things that weren't protected previously, like the Sikh community under the Hate Crime Act were protected because they recognize a particular race. You've got the anti-Semitism definition, which is adopted by the government. So anything that's anti-Jewish, you can automatically link it to anti-Semitism, whereas with the definition of Islamophobia, the government is quite frankly taking their time, and they're not recognizing it. They're bringing about certain issues from certain communities to say, this is why we can't recognize the APPG, the current definition that has been proposed by the APPG. So the question is all these other communities are protected under law. However, Muslims in particular are not, where we're stuck under the Equalities Act rather than given our own definition in this. So do you think that we are legally otherized in this?
Thank you. Wow, that's a really good footnote on the question. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I definitely don't feel best placed to sort of answer that, but what I do think is interesting to think about is, I mean, yeah, you're probably right. I mean, there's obviously a discrepancy there, which is, blatant to see. But I guess there's also a question around, I think we're put in a really limiting framework, aren't we, where actually the highest form of like liberation or anti-racism that we're allowed to imagine is merely, being able to make claims based on these kind of legal policy frameworks that actually, for me, like we just talked about, a world without Islamophobia wouldn't look like me being able to go to the police that no one trusts and no one believes in, and know to be misogynistic and racist and all these other things, or to be able to report to any kind of government body about on the basis of these things. And I understand they have a value, and I do understand that they actually, they can then be, these can be legal precedents that can be set and they can work in certain ways. But what I'm trying to say is, I think the only thought that I want that I have to share on this that is relevant is that I think is also frustrating how these kinds of focal points that although they're important can also be ways of limiting kind of the horizon of our imagination. And this is one of the things I say in the book as well, is that, I would love to get beyond kind of reporting hate crimes and, more people reporting hate and this kind of thing, because it all relies and rests on us constantly having to make claims as this marginalized group rather than actually imagining a different type of world. But I think
we also live in a very
data-driven.
And that's not common knowledge. We're in a very data-driven world, and so it's very much needed that all Muslims are in a position where they understand the systems that are in place, and that how, if other people can manipulate that system in a particular way, we can also use the system to progress in the ways that we want to. There would be no difference for me taking advantage of a particular publishing house because they are a little bit more liberal on the type of books that they would help publish. It would be no different from me doing that. And I think that in that way, I think we need to be more savvy I think is the correct word. I was going to say knowledgeable, but that meant that I'm definitely otherizing my own people at that point.
No,
So we've got a couple of questions, which I don't know. Maybe you can give your opinion. If I mean, they're outside of the scope of literary work, but it might be interesting to hear your personal opinion on them. Are we now in the need of a civil rights movement to become equitable citizens? I mean, I would like to ask if you know we're not already in a civil rights movement, to be honest. And is it civil rights or like
yeah.
international human rights, I suppose, is really the term, because Muslims internationally are in need of a civil rights movement, to be honest. But please give your
Yeah.
opinions on it.
I think I lean towards your kind of answer there, Zara. I think that, I mean, because I think even this idea of like equitable in this environment right now today, I mean, there's just so many layers to that inequity, right? Like if you're an asylum seeking Muslim to the UK versus if you're a passport holding Muslim in the UK versus if you're a Muslim in prison in the UK versus if you're, like it's actually even between Muslims, speaking civilly, speaking legally, speaking whatever, there are discrepancies. And this is something that I think about a lot as somebody who can my job is being able to speak out, and my job is being able to write about Islamophobia, and many people be, criminalized at the point of entering the UK. So I think, um, I think maybe the question is not so again, and this is maybe just like, you're kind of hearing my bias here, but I think I tend more towards thinking not about like these siloed rights, like Muslim civil rights, but more so like, and I think this is actually what Islam asks us to do, right? The call is that we be caliphs of the world. So, and the Prophet ﷺ sent as a mercy to all of mankind. And I think actually one of the ways we can resist Islamophobia is to say that we're actually not going to be just it's not just this thing for us. Islam is actually a thing for the whole world. It's not this thing that we like gatekeep and hold on to. But in fact, it asks us to want the best for every single person. And I know that I'm sure I'm not to say that the person asking the question isn't saying that, but I'm just saying that I think maybe there are other ways to think about this. For example, like you were implying in your own answer there, Zahra, that perhaps actually it's to seek the rights of human beings in general on a much larger scale, and not just equity with what is deemed to be the best right now, but that we can imagine something so much better than this. And I think that's what Islam offers as well, that like, do you know what, the height of freedom is not just that you could be the person arresting somebody, you could be the next Home Secretary to deport someone, but instead something completely different. So yeah, I think I would just push the question in that direction instead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes we learn a lot through asking these questions, because it means that sometimes we can hone our questions better, and that gives us a greater outlook upon what we're actually asking here. Like, are we asking as UK citizens, or am I asking as a Muslim woman, or am I asking as just a Muslim in a global world? Because uh, you know, we're living in a more globalized world than we ever have before, and so there's consequences to that, but there's also vast amounts of opportunities. You never would you have heard of the current genocide of the extent that you would have heard it before? Would the situation had been different if you had heard about Gaza, like about Iraq, about the different massacres that were occurring in the subsequent news? I mean, it died off after a couple of years, but for those of us who were still in the know and were still in the research of this, horrors took place. And so, it's we're living in an increasing globalized world, and we need to be Muslims about it, quite frankly. How do you hope your work, whether poetry, your essays, your books, even your script writing in your theatre, contributes to reshaping stories around identity and belonging in Britain?
So I'm really not passionate about reshaping stories about belonging in Britain.
Why not? That should be the real question.
This is something I'm quite I guess what I'm trying to do with a lot of my work is I actually query the remit of Britain and the identity of Britain, and to say that I'm less interested in belonging to it than breaking it apart and questioning it and querying it and saying, if Britishness inherently is rooted to British Empire, colonialism, capitalism, genocide, slavery, all these terrible things that we shouldn't have talked about, then do I want to make a claim to being part of that? No, but at the same time, I totally understand the desire that people have to, you see an England flag on your street, you see these questions that, Muslims need to learn British values, otherwise they're extremists. But I do think it's a bit of a misnomer, and I think it's a little bit of a distraction to force us to again continuously prove that we've integrated, prove that we also have fish and chips. I think actually we've gone way beyond the question of Brit. Of course we're British at this stage. Like we've been members of the British Empire for however long. We've been in this country for however long. We've been we're part and parcel of the machine. We're even part of the machinery of state violence. Like what more do you want? We've joined the ranks of every single violent institution in this country, be it the Home Office, be it whatever else. So I think for me, the question and the thing that I want my writing to do, or my poetry, or whatever it is actually to make people ask questions. I think that's probably the only contribution that I think that I can make. I definitely don't have answers. I definitely don't have a lot of knowledge. But what I think I hope to do, and I think that art can do in general, is just make people a bit more curious, right? I think, like I've been saying in my different answers in different ways, I think the remit of what we're allowed to imagine has been really curtailed. And that is why, like, even that poem that you mentioned at the beginning, this is not a humanizing poem. This was this poem that wrote after the London Bridge attack in 2017. And I myself experienced this limit to my imagination where I was wanting to write a poem about Muslims, but all I ended up writing again and again was like an apology. It was like, oh, we're really nice as well, and we're funny as well, and we make jokes and we watch the X Factor. And only in the process of doing that did I realize, oh my God, like, what am I doing? This is just turning into like this eternal apology. And instead, why is my humanity conditional? Why should I have to prove anything? And I think that's the thing that I really want people to take from my work, is that actually, why am I interested in trying to prove that I'm British? Okay, actually, why is it important to me to be represented as a Muslim? Actually, what would that mean as a Muslim person? In fact, what is it that we're asked to do by God? And what is it that, Muslims, are we being misled and distracted and diverted to these political projects that don't necessarily align with or meet our reason for being, which is to worship God. We were told that as the reason you're on earth, and worshiping God doesn't look just like being in a cave and worshiping, right? We know that there's a practical and social applicability to that. But what is it? Is it to be represented well in films? Is it to be, like I've said, in the government and in the cabinet and all these things? Or is it something a little bit deeper and a little bit more? So I think that's the only contribution that I hope to make, inshallah, which is, alhamdulillah, the privilege of being an artist is that people engage with your work and then you get to ask these questions. So the best thing that I think someone can do, is going away from a book or a play or whatever, is just to, feel that they've seen something in there that has made them think a second time.
So would you say that's self-reflective? I mean, could that be an aim of your work, is to,
Mm.
I mean, in a lot of it, you self-reflect, but also reflect on outside. And I would say that my comment would be that your work inspires other people to kind of look into themselves. And I think often that is the case. I mean, when you, for example, referenced Malcolm X's book and his work, his speeches, a lot of the time you would reflect to say, well, how did he come up with these ideas? And a lot of it is self-reflection. I mean, he went to Hajj. Like, if you look at the story of Malik al-Shabazz, went to Hajj and had a deep meaning to the point where he took a 180 upon his beliefs, his system, his operational methods, and everything. So, in essence, that could be like
I appreciate that. I would be happy
yeah.
for that to be the case.
Well, maybe next time you can say it was. But it's certainly an interesting. I think all literary work
Mm.
that is inspiring. The reason why it's inspiring is because it has an element of self-reflection in there.
Yeah. I think we are living in a time when, like, I'm sure, I hope I'm not the only person who experiences it, but there is so much distraction. There's so much to take you away from the interiority of yourself, and whether it's a YouTube short or it's, WhatsApp or whatever, like, you just can't get away from some sort of external thing pulling you. And I think, yeah, I guess, like, as a writer, that is something that I really feel, that even just taking that time in the morning to journal, it's actually my moment in the day to go, okay, like, what's going on in here? Because we spend so much time outward. So I think that, without becoming navel-gazing, I do think there's a really important place for, like you say, just knowing yourself a little bit. Like, what is it actually? What's my role? Because I think we get really overwhelmed as well, don't we? Like, what's my role in the world? Do I need to be, at a protest? Do I need to be doing direct action? Should I be doing, why am I not? Like, there's so many pulls, I think, and feelings that we should be doing this or that, or am I doing enough? And, I think one of the wisest pieces of advice that someone gave me was that the path that, asking the question, like, what path should I be on, or what should I be doing, you're placed where you should be doing the thing you should be doing. Trust that Allah has put you exactly where you're meant to be. And I think that's a really useful advice in this day and age as well, just in terms of, I guess, kind of linking to what you're saying in terms of just, okay, let me be where I am and let me reflect carefully about what can I do in the place that I am, rather than worrying about trying to do, everything that everyone else is doing. And also, you don't have to be good at every single thing. It's okay to be, like, good at the one thing that you're doing, and just there are other experts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a part of God consciousness that Islam, that we're here for, essentially, and that is the basis of our belief as Muslims, is that Allah has placed you in a particular spot for at this particular point in time, in this particular physical space, and so He wants something from you. The issue is whether you're willing to give that, really. And Allah's not going to ask you about why you didn't liberate a certain people, why you didn't, you know, write a book in German, Suhaiymah, because I don't know if you're fluent in that, but, you know, why you didn't. He's not going to ask you that. He's going to ask you what you
Yeah.
did with the skills that he gave
Yeah.
you. So that's also part of the reflection that we have there. Alhamdulillah, we're having a really good like conversation here. I've got a couple of questions. So just pivoting off because you spoke about social media, some aspects of how we're distracted, and our Secretary General Mohammed Wajid Akhtar, who has sneakily come in onto Q&A, but he is asking, in this day and age, I am interested why you chose to write a book rather than make more reels and TikToks, etc. Now, you were starting, right? You started writing at a really young age, mashallah. So, first of all, I think you were starting writing without giving away either of our ages.
Yeah.
But you started writing at a time when reels and TikToks weren't really a thing. But I mean, social media is up and coming, and you could have easily have pivoted your career rather than be more literary based. You could have decided to be more spoken word and inspirational speaker or motivational speaker. You could have easily have distracted that way. So why write a book? Why not go into the land of TikTok?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty interesting question because it's something that's been really apparent to me. This book came out in 2023, I think. Let me just double check. I think 22 or 23. And what's fascinating about it is that, yeah, 22, there you go. So that's interesting because at that time, I feel like people, even then, 3 years ago, you could go on Instagram and it wasn't full of shorts, it wasn't full of videos. And I recently have just come back onto Instagram, and I was actually, that was one of my biggest observations, was that your work, your thoughts will not be engaged with if they're not in the form of a video. Whereas I really do think, and I think it's as quick as that. Like I think 3 years ago, people were engaging with. I could write a really long tweet thread and people would engage with that. So I feel like social media has really impacted how we think and how we engage with information. And I think, you know, for whatever reasons that, however the algorithms work and however the millions put into understanding social media and the human behavior and mind, has found that obviously videos are the thing that people respond to and watch. So I think it's as simple as, that wasn't a thing back then. I mean, it's never been a binary though, in terms of like, I definitely don't see myself primarily as a writer. I think the thing that I enjoy the most is being in a room with people. And that's what I spend a lot of my time doing, whether it's workshops or talks or that kind of thing, because I think for me, it is the dialogue that's the most interesting thing. And so I guess as a writer, when you're writing a book, like a book, it's very isolating because you're waiting until that moment when people are actually engaging with it, where you're like, oh, okay, this is the conversation I was waiting for. So yeah, I suppose I am considering, at the moment, like how do you engage with people when people only watch videos? And like, I think there is a question there around, like, do we try to use the means that exist to still have those conversations? But also, I guess my concern is that, can you still have the depth of conversation that you wanting to have in a 90-second reel? I don't know, because it's just like, what, 100 and almost 200 pages. But Allahu Alam, like, maybe we just have to adapt to the times we're in. I'm not sure, but I definitely don't see myself becoming a TikTok star anytime soon.
Or a podcaster?
I had a podcast for a brief while, but I think it was like, now I realize that, like, podcasts, like, everyone has one and they're really cool and you have to be really savvy. And I feel a little bit technologically old now. I don't know if anyone else is doing that.
Impossible. Yeah, that'd be interesting. What do you think? I mean, if it's discussion based, a lot of, if you look at some of the podcasts, essentially just, we're having a conversation right now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
If we were in the same room, we probably would have a better conversation, let's be honest. I thrive off conversation, so it's different. So, we're having a conversation right now. So it's essentially just a conversation. Do you think do you think that's a good medium of,
Yeah, I think so.
of
I
being
guess
able
it's
to
just,
speak?
I do. I think it's just like, I guess I think my query is about, my concern with a lot of these things is not to do with other people, more so myself. I think that the nafs is so easily, the human ego is so easily, will easily convince you that you're not doing something for yourself or recognition. But we know that, the story as old as time, right? That the nafs will convince you to do something, telling you that this is beneficial to the whole society at large, and you're doing this for the rest of, the world. But actually, I think it's really difficult in this day and age to know, and maybe I'm just like, telling on myself here, but I think it's really difficult to know the purity of your intentions in an age where people are watching videos and seeing you, and it's cool to have more followers and your podcast has all these and stuff. So I think unless I knew there was a really clear remit and and I was interviewing really cool people that I really felt like were benefiting listeners, and I could somehow decenter myself in that, then I would think it. Then I yeah would consider it. But otherwise, I feel like I just end up wrapped in these thoughts about like, why am I really doing this and that kind of thing. And I think it's too easy for everyone to give their own voice a platform in this day and age. When actually maybe we just I don't know. I think I need to listen more than I speak. So yeah.
Jazakallah khair. We've had some really good feedback. Jazakallah khair to everybody who's been commenting in the webinar chat. And there's just a couple more questions. So Maria's asked, how do you feel social media has or hasn't shaped your work and your quest to make meaningful art?
That's a really good question. Probably requires a little bit more reflection, but I guess my instinctual response is that I mean, if anyone has ever followed me on Instagram, you will know that I have a really tricky relationship with it. I'll go offline for like 6 months at a time because I feel like it, not necessarily that it impacts my work. I think that's what the question is. Yeah, shapes your work. Yeah, not necessarily that, but I think impacts me as as a person, like on a human level, and I think that in turn does impact your work. I think in some ways I have also been aware that there's certain things that, alhamdulillah, maybe I'm too old to be impacted by or whatnot. And I think one of the things I, for a while, was like, is it actually important to post on social media in quite like a non-marketable, non-well branded way with, without makeup and all those things, just to show like a younger generation that, actually, you don't have to replicate these kind of marketable ideas about the self and etc. But I think actually ultimately, like, I don't really know how much impact that has. So for me, I think, alhamdulillah, I've been blessed enough to have opportunities that are nothing to do with social media in terms of, a play on a stage. That's a physical thing where people are in a room and they're watching work and there's artists on a stage and that still exists, which is nice. And yeah, writing physical books and that kind of thing. So I think I've been able to evade and escape it a little bit, but no doubt the age of social media influences you. And I think um, I always carry this burden of like the fact that there are people who follow you on social media. Like, is that, in terms of what you were talking about earlier, Zafar, like, is that a responsibility as well as a, kind of just reality? So, yeah, I don't know. I think I have to think more carefully about the question that you've asked. It's a good one.
Our crowd is very thought-provoking today. So alhamdulillah. Any other questions, please do add in the chat or in the Q&A option. I mean, Brother Changi has added another question. Maybe give your opinion if you... it's a bit more technical of a question. He's asked regarding when we were talking about the Islamophobic ecosystem that we're under and to dismantle it. So he's spoken from that perspective and has asked, has France provided an Islamophobic blueprint ecosystem for UK? And what actually I would extend this to is to say it's not just France. I mean, you have an ecosystem entrenched within the US, for example, even amongst like some Arab states, which are technically Muslim majority countries. You've got a system there that tries to de-Islamify um, or looks down upon those of their cohort who are essentially practicing Muslims. So what would be your opinion? Do you think the UK is utilizing these blueprints? And if so,
I mean, yeah, I guess like you implied, I think there is I don't know how much there is like a one-way ecosystem because I mean, from at least from my limited research, I know that it's actually often been the UK that is kind of selling counterterrorism policy or indeed, giving intel and research to other countries. So I know that's the case with a lot of the CVE policies around the US. They actually come from um, Britain's prevent strategy. And likewise, actually there's research now that shows that the Uyghurs and whatever violence is being faced by them in the Xinjiang province in China, that actually the UK has been through aid um, kind of lending out, leasing out its own surveillance strategies. So yeah, in terms of France and the UK in particular, I think what's difficult is that there are really different historical contexts in terms of, French colonialism and immigration and UK British colonialism and immigration. I don't know if the UK is taking France as a blueprint, but I think there's a really interesting that whole thing around, French secularism and laicite or whatever they call it. I think that I don't sense that that is as present in the same way here, but Allahu Alam if that is going to become a thing. And maybe the questioner is implying more knowledge of that than I know. So I'm not really sure, but I'd be curious to know more.
interesting, maybe for your next book. So, in finishing, we're almost out of time, but and to finish on a lighter note that we had before, we've had quite heavy conversations and light conversations in between in today's session. Um, Suhaiymah, you're right. You need to recommend to a teenager, to someone between the age of 25 to 40, and someone
Yeah.
who's older, 3 books.
Oh no, you didn't tell me this was the question I was going to be asked to Emma. Um,
Can't always make your
Goodness.
life easy.
No, yeah. I mean, I'm just gonna go with books I've read recently because I hate the like eternal library of all books ever. I'm just gonna
And it
instead,
could be like any books, doesn't have to be
yeah.
specifically on Islamophobia. You
I'm
never
also
know.
gonna read
I
books
mean,
that I've just really enjoyed recently. So one is a book by a woman called Suhaiymah Begum, and it's called The First Jasmines. Absolutely incredible. It is from Harder Press, and it is it's a kind of fictional story, but it's based in the time of the Bangladeshi War for Independence. And I think it's well known that, you know, the Pakistani army used rape as like a massive weapon of war in that time, which is only very recent, past 1971, right? But I think what's so interesting is that there's very little research around this, the oral histories that do exist. You know, it's a really stigmatized topic for women to talk about. And I think what Saima Begum has done so beautifully in this book is that she has talked about and given those women a voice, but in a way that is so, I don't know, just so dignifying and so genuine and so beautiful without also losing the fact that it's extremely traumatic. So I really recommend that. And another book that I read recently is Voices of Resistance from Comma Press, and it's written by full Palestinian women, and it's about their experiences. It's their journals essentially of their experiences during the genocide in the last 2 years, and it is. You know, I think somehow it feels really different to seeing the videos and the images and that kind of like live streaming that we've seen. I think something about the journal form, maybe what you were saying earlier about like it being the interior coming out, it really, really moved me and, you know, really kind of brought to life, I think, the everydayness of that violence. Like, you know, just thinking about the things I hadn't thought about, how, you know, your everyday routine, just, you know, wanting to have the soap that you like to use in your hair or whatever it is, like those little things. Your brother is always annoying, but actually especially annoying in the context of now you're living in a tent with him and just those things that I think were really yeah, really, impactful. So there's just some books. That's not not answering your question properly, Sahar, but those are 2 recommendations for now.
that's awesome. I think they're great recommendations, particularly because they're so topical and also they follow all the generations. Like someone who's 15 would relate to it, and someone who's
Great.
50. So I think that's awesome. Jazakallah khair, Sahima, for your time. As it was a really amazing conversation that we had, and Jazakallah khair to all the attendees for today. Without you, we wouldn't have such thought-provoking questions, and therefore not such a thought-provoking seminar. So Jazakallah khair to everyone. In finishing, we start as we finish with the word of Allah subhanallah. So I would like to end with just a short surah that we conclude today's webinar. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilus salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Assalamu alaikum everyone.
Wa alaikum assalam. Jazakallah khair for having me. Thank you so much for hosting as well. Assalamu alaikum.
Barakallah fiik.
Hafiz. Bye.